A painted jester grins from a royal portrait, his smile holding a secret. We see these figures as simple clowns, but their reality was far more dangerous. Were these men and women in motley just court entertainers, or did they wield a hidden influence that shaped kingdoms? You are about to journey into the clandestine world of the court jester, where you will uncover their true roles as master spies, trusted political advisors, and fearless social critics. You will learn how a joke could be a weapon and how a fool could be the wisest person in the room. What kind of person chooses a life of such perilous laughter? That painted grin hides a history far older than the castle walls. Long before the first jester donned his cap and bells, his spiritual ancestors were already speaking truth to power. In the great halls of ancient Rome, you would have found the scurry. These were not merely comedians, they were sharp-witted performers who used poetry and biting satire to entertain, and often to mock their wealthy patrons. Their words held a sting, a social commentary that the elite were willing to pay for, even when it was directed at themselves. Across Europe, the Celtic bards held a position of immense respect. They were the living historians, the genealogists, and the praise poets of their tribes. A bard's song could make a king's reputation or utterly destroy it. Their power did not come from a sword, but from the carefully chosen words of a story or a poem, a power that demanded both reverence and fear. Meanwhile, in the sophisticated courts of the Islamic world, clever wits and poets were valued advisors. They mastered the art of indirect criticism, wrapping sharp observations in layers of humor and allegory, so they could counsel a caliph without directly challenging his authority. These diverse threads, from the Roman scurry to the tribal bard and the Islamic court wit, all wove together over centuries. They established the jester's foundational purpose long before it ever became an official title. This was not the creation of a mere entertainer, but the evolution of a unique and dangerous role, a sanctioned truth-teller operating in the shadow of the throne. So how did this ancient lineage of poets and satirists become the official fool we recognize? The path to the court was paved with a deliberate and surprising social contract. That official title of court jester came with a job description far beyond telling jokes. A jester's primary duty was the maintenance of the monarch's mirth, a formal responsibility for the king or queen's mental well-being and mood. In an era of immense pressure and constant political intrigue, the jester was a prescribed antidote to melancholy and stress. Their performances were a full spectrum of entertainment designed to captivate the entire court. They were musicians filling the hall with lively tunes. They were acrobats tumbling and juggling with a dazzling skill that silenced the room. They were master storytellers, weaving epic tales of heroes and monsters that held nobles and servants alike in rapt attention. This was not casual amusement, it was a crucial service for the health of the ruler and the atmosphere of the entire household. This official role granted them a singular and powerful privilege, the status of a licensed fool. The cap and bells were not just a costume, they were a symbol of a unique social license. A jester could speak truths that would see a nobleman imprisoned or a knight executed. They could mock a king's poor decision, question a queen's stubbornness, or satirize the greed of a courtier, all under the protective guise of folly. This made them an indispensable part of court ceremonies, feasts, and the rhythm of daily life. Their presence turned a stiff political gathering into a memorable celebration and a quiet evening into an event. They were the heartbeat of the royal household, a constant, vibrant force for laughter and, when necessary, for uncomfortable truth. But this license to speak came with a razor's edge balance. How did a jester know just how far to push a joke before the laughter turned to fury? That razor's edge balance defined the jester's entire existence. Their license to jest was a form of sanctioned impunity, a social contract that allowed a single person in the entire kingdom to speak uncomfortable truths directly to the monarch's face. While every other courtier offered flattery, the jester delivered critique wrapped in the disarming package of a joke. This was often the only genuine feedback a ruler would receive, a vital mechanism to pierce the bubble of sycophants that always surrounded the throne. The methods were as clever as they were dangerous. A jester might use a witty riddle to point out a king's hypocrisy, or perform a biting parody of a nobleman's greed for the entire court to see. They turned satire into a political tool. The legendary jester Triboulet, who served King Francis I of France, once mocked his master's entire military campaign. After a disastrous defeat, the king and his court were solemnly recounting their losses. Triboulet interrupted, declaring, "Sire, I have finally figured out the true order of bravery in this army. You are all incredibly brave, for you ran away 20 miles ahead of the enemy." The court fell silent, waiting for the king's rage. Instead, Francis laughed. The jester's absurd observation, cloaked in humor, had perfectly captured the folly of the retreat without directly accusing the king of cowardice. In another instance, a jester named Will Somers watched King Henry VIII of England agonize over an enormous new palace he was building, a project draining the royal treasury. Somers did not plead for fiscal responsibility. He simply approached the king, bowed low, and requested permission to become a royal fool as well. Puzzled, Henry asked why he would need 2 fools. Somers replied, "Because, Your Majesty, your first fool is building a new house, and I wish to be the fool that lives in it." The critique of the king's extravagant spending was delivered with such perfect, pointed wit that it could not be easily dismissed. This was the jester's true power. They reframed failure as farce and extravagance as absurdity, forcing a moment of self-awareness upon the most powerful person in the room. It was a psychological game of the highest stakes, where the right joke could correct a king's course and the wrong one could cost a jester his head. That cap and bells were more than just a uniform. Every element of the jester's iconic costume was a carefully chosen symbol, a walking statement of their unique and contradictory role in society. The most striking feature was the motley, the patchwork of clashing colors and fabrics. This was not a sign of poverty, but a powerful symbol. The jester's cloak was stitched together from pieces representing every social class, from the coarse wool of a peasant to the fine silk of a noble. It visually declared that the fool belonged to no single group, and yet understood them all, making them the one person who could comment on the entire social order without bias. Atop their head sat the coxcomb hat, a floppy red crest resembling a rooster's comb. This was a dual symbol. On one hand, it represented foolishness and animalistic silliness, a public admission of their role as the court's clown. Yet the rooster was also an ancient symbol of fertility and the dawn, hinting at a deeper, life-giving wisdom beneath the absurd exterior. In their hand, they carried the marotte, a miniature scepter topped with a replica of their own foolish head. This was a brilliant parody of royal power. While the king held a scepter to symbolize his divine authority over the realm, the jester held a mock scepter to symbolize his authority over folly itself. It was a constant, silent reminder that the pursuit of power could be its own form of foolishness. Then there were the bells sewn onto their costume and hat. Their cheerful jingle was a practical tool, announcing the jester's arrival to lighten the mood. But in folklore, bells were also believed to have the power to ward off evil spirits. With every step, the jester was not just announcing their presence, they were performing a kind of spiritual cleansing, using their laughter and sound to chase away the demons of melancholy and ill fortune from the court. This entire ensemble transformed the jester into a living, breathing paradox, a critic whose very appearance questioned the foundations of the society they entertained. But what happened when the court left the castle walls and this walking symbol of satire encountered the common people? That costume of motley and bells was the perfect disguise for a spy. While nobles saw a harmless fool, the jester was often the monarch's most effective intelligence gatherer. moving through the shadows of the court with a license no one else possessed. Their perceived insignificance was their greatest asset. A duke and a bishop might lower their guard, speaking freely of plots and grievances, believing the jester was too busy with his antics to listen or too simple to understand. They were tragically mistaken. A jester's entire career was built on listening, on understanding the subtle currents of power and personal ambition that flowed through the royal court. This unique mobility allowed them to operate with impunity. They could drift from the king's private chambers to the bustling servants' halls, from a state banquet to a military encampment, their presence never questioned. While a foreign ambassador would be watched every moment, the jester could mingle with the visiting delegation, using a juggling act or a witty song to break the ice and loosen tongues. They were the ultimate fly on the wall, and the entire court willingly ignored them. But how did they get their secrets back to the king or queen without raising suspicion? The answer lies in the very core of their craft. A jester did not need to slip a sealed letter to his patron. He could simply perform. A seemingly innocent nursery rhyme, sung for the court's amusement, might contain a coded warning about a disloyal baron. A joke about a foolish farmer could be an allegory for a rival kingdom's military preparations. The jester's stage was his dead drop, and his comedy was his encrypted message. In an age of fragile alliances and constant political intrigue, this early form of espionage was invaluable. The fool who made the king laugh at dinner might have just prevented a war that very morning, all without anyone beyond the throne ever knowing his true role. This hidden power raises a profound question. What was the ultimate price for living a life balanced so precariously between laughter and treachery? A king's most trusted advisor often wore no crown but a cap of bells. These sharp-witted fools served as informal political counselors, using allegory and humor to shape the very fate of nations from the shadows. While a minister risked his head for bluntly opposing a monarch's plan for war, a jester could achieve the same end with a well-timed story. He might recount a fable about a lion who hunted too far from his den, only to return and find his cubs stolen by a clever fox. The king, amused by the tale, would be left to ponder its deeper meaning about overextending his military forces. This was the jester's unique genius. They reframed statecraft as storytelling, allowing a ruler to see his own folly from a safe, fictional distance. The legendary jester Raha, a favorite of King Henry I of England, famously used this method. The king was determined to levy a harsh new tax upon his already struggling subjects. His barons were too fearful to protest, but Raha approached the throne not with a plea but with a performance. He began to juggle, but instead of balls, he used small, round cheeses. He tossed them higher and higher, declaring each one represented a tax the king was piling upon the people. "Watch how high they fly," he said, "but what happens when they grow too heavy for the air?" The cheeses fell, scattering across the floor. The court laughed, but the message was unmistakable. Push your people too far, and the entire system will collapse. The king, struck by the simple, visual metaphor, reportedly reconsidered the tax. This was counsel no official could offer. A jester held no land, commanded no armies, and sought no title. His only ambition was the survival and stability of the court that fed him. This lack of personal political ambition made his advice uniquely pure, and therefore uniquely dangerous to those who held real power. A duke's warning could be dismissed as envy, but a fool's joke carried the ring of truth. He was the one person in the room who had nothing to gain by lying and everything to lose if the king failed. Yet the life of a jester was a dance on a high wire without a net. For every king who appreciated a clever critique, another possessed a temper that could turn lethal in an instant. The legendary tribulate of France learned this the hard way. Serving the fiery King Francis I, Tribulate one day went too far, publicly mocking the monarch in a way that crossed an invisible line. The king's rage was immediate and absolute. He condemned his own fool to death, But even in this dire moment, the rules of the jester's unique office offered a final, desperate loophole. As the story goes, Francis, perhaps regretting his harsh decree, granted Triboulet the choice of how he would die. The jester, with impeccable timing, replied, "Good sire, for the sake of my soul, I choose to die of old age." The king, disarmed by the absurd and witty logic, could not help but laugh and rescinded the execution order. Triboulet's quick mind had saved his life, a perfect demonstration of the very wit that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. This was the ultimate gamble of the profession. Across the English Channel, another famous jester navigated an equally treacherous court. Will Sommers was the constant companion of King Henry VIII, a man notorious for executing wives and advisors with chilling frequency. Yet Sommers not only survived Henry's long and turbulent reign, he thrived. His success lay in his deep understanding of the king's complex personality. He offered not just jokes, but genuine friendship and a rare, unbiased ear. Sommers knew when a light-hearted jest was needed to pull Henry from a dark mood, and he knew when silence was the wiser course. His longevity itself is a testament to his immense skill, a man who remained in favor while so many others lost their heads. Another jester, Archibald Armstrong, in the court of King James I, wielded such influence that he amassed a small fortune and openly feuded with the powerful Lord Chancellor. Archie's sharp tongue made him enemies, but his favor with the king protected him for years, until he finally overplayed his hand with one insult too many directed at the Queen. These men were not mere entertainers, they were celebrities of their age, their names and antics known throughout the kingdom. Their fame and influence demonstrated that the most successful jester was more than a fool. He was a master psychologist, a political survivor, and a trusted, if unofficial, pillar of the crown. But this world of perilous privilege was not exclusively a man's domain. A few remarkable women also mastered the art of the courtly joke, carving out their own unique and powerful spaces in history. That fine line between a king's laughter and his wrath was as thin as a blade. For every story of a clever jester saving his own skin, there are darker tales where the joke fell flat with fatal consequences. This licensed fool's greatest protection was also his greatest vulnerability. His life depended entirely on the unpredictable mood of a single, all-powerful individual. A jest that delighted the king on a Tuesday could see the same jester in the dungeons by Wednesday. The punishment for a misstep was swift and severe. Imprisonment in a cold, damp cell was a common fate for a joke deemed seditious. A public beating or flogging served as a brutal reminder of the jester's place, stripping away the illusion of invincibility and replacing it with raw pain. For more serious offenses, usually those that touched upon the monarch's honor or challenged their authority too directly, the penalty was permanent banishment from the court. This was a sentence of social death, casting the fool out from the only world he knew, stripping him of his identity and his livelihood in a single, cruel stroke. And in the most extreme cases, when a jester's words were interpreted not as folly but as treason, the ultimate price was exacted. Execution was a stark, public demonstration that the crown's patience had its limits. The psychological toll of this existence was immense. Every performance was a high-stakes gamble. A jester had to be a master reader of human emotion, constantly monitoring the king's face for the slightest flicker of irritation beneath the amusement. He had to calculate the risks of a joke in a split second, weighing the potential benefit of a wise critique against the very real possibility of ruin. This was not a career for the faint of heart. It demanded a unique blend of courage, wit, and emotional resilience, a willingness to live every day with the knowledge that your survival hinged on making a tyrant laugh at his own flaws. How did such a volatile and dangerous institution finally come to an end? Even the authority of the church was not safe from the jester's biting wit. In an age where faith governed every aspect of life, the fool dared to parody sacred rituals and question the very people who acted as intermediaries to God. This was perhaps their most dangerous game. During the Middle Ages, a remarkable tradition known as the Feast of Fools would temporarily turn the world upside down. In cathedrals across Europe, lower-level clergy and choir boys would elect a boy bishop or a lord of misrule. They would wear vestments inside out, use incense made from old shoes, and chant ridiculous versions of hymns. For a single day, the solemn hierarchy of the church was subverted through sanctioned mockery, and the court jester was often the symbolic heart of this chaos. He represented the spirit of this inversion, giving a voice to the underlying popular anxieties about clerical corruption. A jester could perform a skit about a greedy bishop more concerned with his tithes than his flock, or a parody of a solemn religious procession that highlighted the vanity of its participants. He used allegory to ask the questions the common man dared not utter. If a priest preaches poverty but lives in luxury, is that not a form of folly? If the church sells forgiveness, is that not a mockery of divine grace? For anyone else, this would be heresy, punishable by excommunication or worse. But the jester, protected by his cap and bells, could hold up a distorted mirror to the religious establishment. He channeled a deep-seated public skepticism about the gap between religious ideals and the all-too-human failings of its leaders. His comedy became a safety valve, releasing social pressure that might otherwise have boiled over into outright rebellion. It was a delicate and perilous act, mocking the institution that held the keys to heaven, yet it proved that no power, not even the divine right of kings or the authority of the church, was beyond the reach of a well-aimed joke. While men dominated the courts, a few brilliant women also mastered the art of perilous laughter. These female fools or foolisses carved out a space for themselves, navigating the treacherous politics of the royal court with a unique and potent form of wit. In the volatile court of King Henry VIII of England, Jane Fool served alongside the famous Will Sommers. Her presence in the royal accounts is a quiet testament to her role, a trusted entertainer for Queen Catherine Parr and the royal children. Unlike male jesters who might rely on acrobatics or slapstick, Jane and her counterparts often wielded a sharper, more intellectual weapon: wordplay. Their humor was layered, relying on clever puns and double entendres that could flatter and critique in the same breath, a necessary subtlety for women operating in a man's world. Across the Channel, Mathurine de Valois became a legend in the French courts of Henry III and Henry IV. She was known for her extravagant costumes, often dressing as an Amazon warrior or an angel, using her appearance to immediately subvert expectations. Mathurine's genius lay in her ability to mediate. During the brutal wars of religion, she moved freely between the Catholic and Protestant factions, using her jokes to diffuse tension and even, according to legend, warning Henry IV of an assassination attempt. Her humor was a diplomatic tool, a way to speak hard truths to warring sides under the cover of performance. The presence of these women added a profound layer of social commentary. A male jester mocking a powerful man was one thing, but a woman doing the same challenged the very foundations of patriarchal authority. Their success demanded an exceptional understanding of psychology and power dynamics, proving that the most effective fool was not always the one who tumbled, but the one who made you think twice before you laughed. The jester's golden age could not last forever. The political landscape of Europe began a profound shift in the 17th century, one that would squeeze the licensed fool out of existence. The rise of absolute monarchy was the primary force behind this change. Kings and queens increasingly claimed power derived directly from God, a divine right that brooked no dissent. In such a system, a figure whose entire purpose was to critique and mock the crown became not just inconvenient, but politically dangerous. The court jester, once a vital source of feedback, was now seen as an insult to the royal dignity itself. The very idea of sanctioned impunity withered under the harsh sun of absolutism. Why tolerate a critic in motley when you could surround yourself with sycophants in silk? Simultaneously, a cultural revolution was stealing the Jesters' audience. Professional public theatres like the Globe in London began to flourish. For the price of a penny, a commoner could watch a play by William Shakespeare or Christopher Marlowe, stories filled with clowns and fools far more elaborate than anything a single court performer could offer. These stage comedians offered satire that was directed at society in general, not at a specific, sensitive monarch. The court no longer held a monopoly on high-quality entertainment, and the unique value of the resident fool diminished with every public performance. Perhaps the most philosophical blow came from the Enlightenment. This new age championed reason, logic, and scientific inquiry above all else. The jester's power had always resided in a mystical, almost sacred tradition. The idea of the holy fool whose madness provided divine insight. To the enlightened thinkers of the 18th century, this was mere superstition. Why listen to the ramblings of a fool when a philosopher could deliver a reasoned, logical argument in a carefully written treatise? The jester's ambiguous wisdom seemed chaotic and outdated in a world that was striving for order and clarity. As a result, the role did not vanish overnight. It slowly faded, becoming purely ceremonial. The jester was reduced to a nostalgic prop at coronations or a quaint character in royal processions, his cap and bells now empty symbols of a bygone era. By the dawn of the 19th century, the last true court jesters had quietly departed the stage, their laughter echoing only in the history books. The court jester was not a uniquely European invention. This need for a sanctioned truth-teller appeared in royal courts across the globe, each culture crafting its own version of the fool who dared to speak. In ancient China during the Qin dynasty, a court jester named Yu Mao became legendary. He understood that direct criticism of the emperor was a death sentence, so he mastered the art of the allegory. He would approach the throne not with a complaint, but with a story about a foolish farmer or a greedy merchant, his simple tales always containing a profound lesson on governance and humility. An emperor could dismiss the advice of a minister, but he would often ponder the moral of a jester's fable for days, the truth slipping past his defenses disguised as entertainment. Far to the west, in the sprawling palaces of the Ottoman Empire, the soitari held a familiar role. These Turkish jesters, with their quick wit and musical talents, were fixtures in the Sultan's court. They enjoyed a similar license to mock and advise, their jokes providing a crucial, humanizing counterbalance to the immense and often isolating power of the ruler. Their presence was a reminder that even a caliph needed to laugh at himself. On the Indian subcontinent, the Mughal courts featured the Vidashaka. This character, often found in classical Sanskrit dramas, was a Brahmin clown who served as a companion to the king. The Vidashaka's humor was rooted in wordplay and gentle mockery, and his unique position allowed him to be the king's most honest confidant, questioning his decisions from a place of devoted friendship. Perhaps the most fascinating parallel, however, comes from a very different tradition. Among many Native American tribes, figures known as Contrarian clowns or heyokas played a vital spiritual and social role. These individuals did not serve a single ruler but the entire community. Their purpose was to challenge convention itself. A heyoka might wear heavy furs in the summer heat or pretend to cry at a joyous occasion. By doing everything backwards, they forced people to see the world from a new perspective, questioning their own rigid assumptions and reminding them that wisdom often resides in paradox. While their methods and settings varied wildly, from the Chinese emperor's hall to the Native American village circle, these figures shared a universal purpose. They were the embodied conscience of their society, the necessary voice of chaos in a world of order, proving that the human need for a fearless truth-teller is a thread that connects all of humanity. That fine line between performance and reality was the jester's psychological tightrope. To understand the fool, we must confront a deeply uncomfortable truth. In some of the darkest corners of this history, monarchs collected individuals with genuine cognitive differences or physical disabilities, cruelly exploiting their conditions for the court's amusement. These unfortunate souls were not performers in control of a persona. They were living exhibits, their humanity stripped away to become objects of ridicule. Their presence was a grotesque perversion of the jester's role, a stark reminder of the era's profound lack of understanding and compassion. Yet this cruel practice stands in sharp contrast to the reality of the vast majority of jesters, who were not victims of their own minds but masters of them. These men and women were exceptionally intelligent, observant, and psychologically astute. Their madness was a meticulously crafted performance, a strategic tool as deliberate as a diplomat's speech. They adopted the persona of the simpleton to navigate a world where speaking plainly could mean death. This calculated folly was their ultimate shield. By pretending to be harmless and slightly unhinged, they could deliver a devastating critique and then simply shrug, as if the thought had bubbled up from a mind too simple to understand its own impact. It was a brilliant act of psychological judo, using the court's perception of them as a weapon against the court itself. They feigned a lack of understanding to demonstrate a deeper wisdom, performing insanity to expose the genuine madness of unchecked power and political intrigue. This required a profound and constant duality of mind, a state where one part of the brain was fully immersed in the raving antics of a fool, while another part coolly and calmly calculated the king's reaction, the baron's whispers, and the safety of the next words to be spoken. How could a person maintain such a fractured identity for years without the performance consuming them? The most successful jesters were not just actors, they were master psychologists who understood a fundamental truth. Sometimes the safest way to tell a dangerous truth is to make everyone believe you are too mad to even know what it means. Shakespeare gave the court jester a stage that would echo through the centuries. In his most profound tragedies and his most whimsical comedies, the fool emerges not as a background entertainer, but as the moral and intellectual center of the play. These characters were his masterstroke, transforming the historical jester into an enduring archetype of wisdom cloaked in madness. In the bleak storm of King Lear, the fool stands by the ruined king's side as every other courtier abandons him. His jests are not mere punchlines, they are devastating diagnoses of Lear's catastrophic folly. When the king foolishly divides his kingdom, the fool warns him, "Thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise." This is not comedy, it is prophecy. He is the voice of the king's own neglected conscience, a truth so painful it can only be delivered in riddles and songs. The laughter he elicits is hollow, a prelude to the profound tragedy that follows. In the sun-drenched confusion of Twelfth Night, the clown fest moves through a world of disguised identities and foolish romantic pursuits. He is the one character who sees everything with absolute clarity. His song that ends the play, with its melancholy refrain about the rain that reigneth every day, serves as a sobering reminder of life's hardships after all the revelry has ended. Fest holds up a mirror to the vanity of the nobles, proving that the man paid to be a fool is often the only one who is truly sane. Meanwhile, in the forest of Arden, in As You Like It, the jester touchstone accompanies the exiled courtiers. His humor is more sophisticated, a weapon of wit he uses to mock the artificial conventions of courtly love and the absurd pretensions of the rural simpleton he encounters. He demonstrates that foolishness is not confined to those who wear the motley. It is a universal human condition. Shakespeare's genius was in recognizing that the jester's license was more than a courtly privilege, it was a dramatic device. By placing the fool outside the rigid social hierarchy, he granted these characters a unique freedom to speak the truths that the noble heroes and heroines could not see or dared not utter. They are the cracked vessels through which the playwright pours his sharpest social commentary and his deepest philosophical questions. These fictional fools did more than steal scenes, they fundamentally shaped how we remember their real-life counterparts. They cemented the idea of the wise fool into the Western imagination, creating a legacy where the jester's cap and bells are forever associated not with simple-mindedness, but with a painful, necessary, and transcendent clarity. Shakespeare's stage was just the beginning. The jester's spirit did not vanish from the world, it simply shed its motley and found new stages. Today's late-night talk show hosts are the direct descendants of the court fool, standing before a modern court of millions. With a monologue and a smirk, they dissect the powerful, using comedy as a scalpel to expose political hypocrisy and social injustice. Their opening jokes are the modern equivalent of a jester's biting riddle, delivered under the same protective license of entertainment. The stand-up comedian who risks outrage to challenge an audience's assumptions is channeling that ancient, perilous tradition of speaking uncomfortable truths. They face their own form of banishment, from social media outrage to cancelled shows, proving that the price for satire remains real. Even the political cartoonist, reducing complex scandals to a single, devastating image, operates on the same principle as the jester who performed a skit about a greedy baron. The tools have changed from cap and bells to a microphone and a digital screen, but the essential role remains unchanged, the truth teller who makes you laugh until you think. This archetype thrives with explosive power in our fantasy epics. The Joker in Batman is the court jester stripped of all his allegorical safety and unleashed as pure, chaotic critique. He is the dark mirror of the wise fool, whose jokes are not meant to correct the king but to burn the entire castle down, exposing the thin veneer of order we call society. In the brutal world of Game of Thrones, a character like the cynical jester at the court of King Joffrey delivers lines that cut deeper than any sword. His songs and quips the only source of unfiltered commentary in a realm drowning in treachery. These modern incarnations prove that jester's function is timeless. We still grant our entertainers a unique license to say what others cannot, because sometimes the most profound truth is one we can only hear when it is wrapped in a laugh. The jester's world was a paradox of privilege and confinement, defined by the very walls he lived within. His private chambers were often situated in a curious and telling location, just a short walk from the king or queen's own apartments. This proximity was not a mark of high status but a practical necessity. The monarch required their fool on demand, a ready antidote to a sudden fit of melancholy or a burst of late-night anxiety. A single bell pull in the royal bedroom could summon the jingle of motley from down the hall. Imagine the space he returned to after a long evening of performance. It was likely a small, sparsely furnished room, yet it would have been a sanctuary of controlled chaos. Here, the vibrant props of his trade piled high, a colorful jumble of juggling clubs, discarded masks, and musical instruments leaning against stone walls. The air might have smelled of leather, candle wax, and the faint, sweet scent of the herbs he used to soothe his throat after hours of singing and shouting. This personal clutter stood in stark contrast to the formal, intimidating grandeur of the staterooms he performed in. His quarters were a reflection of his own mind, a place where the chaotic tools of his trade could be stored, sorted, and prepared for the next high-stakes performance. This physical closeness to the seat of power was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was an immense honor, a sign of the monarch's personal favor and dependence. He lived closer to the king than most dukes or bishops, yet this privilege was also a cage. He was never truly off-duty, his life perpetually on call. The sound of footsteps outside his door at an odd hour could mean a royal command for entertainment, or it could signal a guard coming to drag him to the dungeons for a joke that had finally landed wrong. He lived and slept in the shadow of the throne, a constant, vibrating reminder that his safety, his comfort, and his very life existed at the fleeting whim of a single, unpredictable person. His home was not a castle, but a gilded cage located at the very heart of the labyrinth of power. You did not simply apply for the position of court jester. The path to the motley was as varied as the fools themselves, a strange mix of raw talent, brutal politics, and sheer luck. Some were born into it, the sons and daughters of traveling performers who learned to juggle and joke before they could properly walk. Their entire childhood was an apprenticeship, a rigorous training ground for a life in the spotlight. Others were plucked from obscurity because of a singular, undeniable gift. A stable hand with a lightning-fast wit who made the whole garrison laugh, or a local poet whose satirical verses caught the ear of a passing noble, might suddenly find themselves summoned to the castle, their natural talent their only ticket to a new life. The most chilling path, however, was to be given. A jester could be a lavish gift from one duke to another, a living, breathing commodity exchanged to secure a political alliance or settle a debt. Your life, your laughter, and your freedom were now someone else's property. Once inside the court, the real education began under the stern eye of a senior jester. This was not a formal school, but a master and apprentice relationship forged in the fires of daily performance. The old fool would teach the novice the essential toolkit of survival. First was improvisation, the ability to spin a joke from any situation in a split second. A dropped goblet, a visiting ambassador's ridiculous hat, the king's sour mood, everything was fuel for a jest. Next came music, learning to play the lute or pipe to accompany songs both bawdy and bittersweet. Memory was paramount. A jester had to hold a vast repository of stories, ballads, and most importantly, the personal histories and secret shames of every powerful person in the room, knowing which ones could be gently teased and which were utterly forbidden. And for many, there was the physical craft, the tumbling, juggling, and acrobatics that provided a wordless, universal comedy. This apprenticeship was a brutal honing of instinct. The master would constantly test the apprentice, throwing them into difficult social situations to see how they handled themselves. He was teaching the young fool to read a room, to sense the subtle shift in the air when a joke was teetering on the edge of disaster. They practiced the art of the graceful retreat, how to pivot from a comment that landed poorly to a self-deprecating quip that would disarm the tension. Every skill, from playing a chord to landing a somersault, was in service of one ultimate, terrifying goal: the art of surviving by making a tyrant laugh. This was a career with no safety net, where a single failed performance could be your last. The jester's dinner plate was a mirror of his social standing, a collection of culinary handmade downs from the royal table. He did not feast on the first cuts of venison or the choicest pastries served to the king. Instead, his meal was often a rich, chaotic stew of leftovers, the remnants of a banquet that had passed through a dozen noble hands before reaching his platter. A half-eaten leg of pheasant, a trencher of bread soaked in gravy, a few bruised pears from the dessert course, this was his typical fare. He ate like a king, but only after the king and everyone else of consequence had finished. His diet was a constant, tangible reminder of his place, an intimate participant in the court's luxury who was always served last. This strange privilege extended to his social world, a delicate dance of hierarchy and familiarity. He could share a body just with a duke in the great hall, then an hour later be drinking ale in the kitchens with the scullions who had prepared the duke's meal. He was a social chameleon, the only person who could move fluidly between the highest and lowest ranks without formal invitation. Servants confided in him, seeing a fellow outsider. Courtiers tolerated him, valuing his access to the royal ear, and the royal children often adored him, viewing him as a magical, playful uncle who brought laughter into their rigidly structured lives. Yet this constant movement came at a profound cost. The jester was the ultimate insider who could never truly belong. After the laughter faded and the court retired, he returned to his small chamber, a man suspended between worlds. He knew the secrets of the powerful and the grievances of the powerless, but this knowledge built an invisible wall around him. He could trust no one completely, for any friendship might be a pretense designed to manipulate his unique access. He was a solitary figure in a crowded castle, a man whose life was defined by performance, both on the stage and off. This deep-seated loneliness was the unspoken price of the cap and bells, the quiet echo that followed the jingle of his every step. That deep-seated loneliness finds its echo in a deck of cards. The jester's legacy was so powerful it transcended the castle walls and became an archetype, immortalized as the fool in the tarot. This card, numbered 0, is not about stupidity. It depicts a young man, bag slung over his shoulder, gazing toward the sky as he steps blithely off a cliff. A small dog nips at his heels, not as a warning, but as a reminder to stay grounded in the real world. The fool represents the pure potential of a new beginning, the innocent faith required to take a leap into the unknown. He is every soul at the start of its journey, unburdened by past failures and open to all possibilities. This is the jester's ultimate spiritual inheritance, the holy fool whose lack of worldly wisdom allows him to see a different, more profound truth. This symbolic power resonated deeply with artists who used the jester's image to convey complex and often unsettling ideas. In the fantastical and morbid visions of Hieronymus Bosch, fools appear repeatedly, their motley a mark of sinful folly and moral confusion. For Bosch, the jester was a symbol of humanity's vanity, chasing empty pleasures on a path that leads only to death and damnation. He was a walking memento mori, a reminder that beneath the laughter and the jingling bells, every one of us is dancing toward the same inevitable end. A century later, the Spanish painter Diego Velázquez created one of the most haunting portraits of the jester's condition in his work, Las Meninas. While the Infanta and her attendants are the official focus, Velázquez paints himself into the scene, and in the background, almost swallowed by shadow, stands the dwarf jester Maria Barbola. Her solemn, watchful expression offers a silent critique of the entire elaborate performance of courtly life. She sees everything, yet her place is on the periphery, a symbol of the social order being subtly subverted by the artist's gaze. These artistic depictions cemented the jester as more than a man. He became a versatile symbol for the absurdity of human ambition, the fragility of life, and the quiet wisdom that exists in the margins. His image in paint and cardstock asks us a perpetual question: who is truly the fool? The one who dances on the cliff's edge in search of a new world, or the one who remains safely behind, never daring to leap at all? A jester's laughter was prescribed like medicine. In an age before modern psychology, the court understood a profound truth about the human spirit, that a heavy heart could weaken the body as surely as any physical ailment. This belief, often called physic for the king, placed the jester in a role far beyond entertainer. He was a therapeutic agent for the monarch's mind. His jokes and antics were not mere diversions. They were a calculated treatment for melancholy, stress, and the immense psychological burdens of rule. A king plagued by indecision or a queen sunk in sorrow was a liability to the entire realm, and the jester's primary duty was to lift that shadow. He was the court's first line of defense against despair, an intuitive form of psychological support whose tool was joy. This philosophy was deeply rooted in the era's medical understanding. Physicians believed that good digestion was the cornerstone of health, and that a positive, light-hearted mood directly aided the body's ability to process food and maintain its vital balance of humors. A fit of laughter after a large feast was not just pleasant, it was considered medically beneficial, helping to stave off the lethargy and ill temper that could follow a heavy meal. The jester was therefore scheduled like a course of treatment, often performing right after dinner to ensure the king's mirth would lead to good digestion and a restful night. His value was measured in the monarch's improved mood and renewed vigor. How many wars were avoided or wise decrees issued because a fool's timely joke pulled a ruler back from the brink of a dark mood? The jester's success in this role required a deep, almost clinical understanding of his patient's mind. He had to diagnose the royal temperament with a single glance, knowing when a boisterous song was needed or when a quiet, clever riddle would be more effective than a tumbler's pratfall. He was part comedian, part therapist, and his stage was the most stressful consulting room in the kingdom. This ancient recognition of laughter's healing power suggests that the court jester was not just a historical curiosity, but a precursor to our modern understanding of wellness, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful medicine requires no potion, only a perfect punchline. The jester's motley was not confined to the throne room, it was also a familiar sight on the battlefield. When kings marched to war, their fools marched with them, serving a vital role far from the comforts of the castle. In the grim hours before a clash of arms, the jester moved through the ranks of nervous soldiers. He did not carry a sword, but his lute and his voice were his weapons. He would sing bawdy songs that reminded men of home and tell heroic stories that stoked their courage, his performance a crucial shield against the creeping fear that could break an army before the first arrow flew. His presence was a piece of home, a reminder of the world they were fighting to protect, and his laughter was a powerful medicine for morale in the face of imminent death. This role extended beyond simple entertainment into the realm of psychological warfare. From the safety of the camp's edge, a clever jester could be deployed as a weapon against the enemy's spirit. He would shout insults, compose mocking rhymes about the opposing general's incompetence, or perform ridiculous parodies of the enemy's battle formations. This calculated mockery was designed to provoke and demoralize, to make the opposing force feel foolish and enraged. An angry soldier is often a careless soldier, and the jester's barbs could be as effective as a volley of arrows in disrupting the enemy's discipline and resolve. On very rare occasions, the line between performance and combat blurred entirely. There are scattered accounts of jesters who, in the heat of a desperate fight, abandoned their persona and took up a fallen soldier's weapon to defend their king. More common, however, were the legends of jesters using their wits as their ultimate defense. One famous tale tells of a jester whose camp was captured by enemy soldiers. Instead of fleeing, he greeted the invaders with open arms, proclaiming himself their long-lost court fool, and immediately beginning to mock and satirize his own captured king with such hilarious venom that the enemy commander, thoroughly amused, spared his life. In that moment, the joke was not just a performance, it was a survival strategy of breathtaking audacity. The battlefield, therefore, revealed the jester's function in its purest form. He was a keeper of courage for his own side and a weapon of ridicule against the enemy, proving that his most potent power always resided not in a sword, but in the sharp, unpredictable edge of his mind. Their enduring mystique lies in that very loneliness, that singular dance on the edge of power. Centuries after the last court fool departed, we remain captivated because the jester embodies a fantasy we all share, the dream of speaking a dangerous truth and getting away with it. They represent the ultimate underdog, armed with nothing but wit, standing before a throne and saying the one thing no one else dares to utter. In a world where authority often feels absolute and unassailable, the jester is a potent symbol of rebellion. They prove that a laugh can be a revolutionary act, that a pointed joke can topple a tyrant's ego faster than any army. This is not just about comedy, it is about the subversive power of humor to challenge, to undermine, and to humanize the most intimidating institutions. We admire them because they channel our own deep-seated desire to poke the bear, to question the rules, and to mock the pompous, all without suffering the consequences. They are the fantasy of freedom in a constrained world. The jester also resonates because they represent a rare form of purity in a corrupt system. Unlike the scheming courtier or the greedy bishop, the fool had no lands to seize, no title to inherit. His only currency was truth, delivered in its most disarming form. This lack of selfish ambition makes his critiques feel authentic, his wisdom untarnished by personal gain. We trust the jester because he has nothing to sell us except a moment of clarity wrapped in a laugh. He is the voice of the people in the court of the king, the living conscience of a society that often felt powerless. This is why they leap from the history books into our comic books and our movie screens. We see their spirit in the trickster heroes who outsmart giants, in the satirical news hosts who dissect the powerful, and in every person who uses a well-aimed quip to deflate a bully. The court may be gone, but the fool's lesson is timeless, that sometimes the most courageous and effective weapon against overwhelming power is not a sword, but a perfectly timed, brilliantly crafted joke. Yet for every jester's name we remember, countless more have vanished into the silent archives of history. The official records are frustratingly fragmentary, a collection of payments for services rendered or brief mentions in a courtier's diary. They give us the public performance, the anecdote told by a noble observer, but they almost never grant us access to the private mind behind the motley. What did these men and women truly think as they bowed and tumbled before the throne? Did the persona of the fool become so ingrained that it eventually consumed their private selves, or did they retreat into a deep, hidden solitude when the bells were finally removed? We can only guess at the inner lives of figures like Jane Fool, whose existence is confirmed in royal account books but whose own voice is lost to us completely. She is a name, a salary, a ghost in the ledger. For every legendary tribulet whose stories were deemed worthy of retelling, there were hundreds of anonymous fools whose sharpest witticisms and quietest sorrows died with them in unrecorded rooms. They performed for an audience of the most powerful people of their age, yet their own stories were rarely considered important enough to preserve in their own words. This historical silence is perhaps the greatest testament to their complex position. They were simultaneously central to court life and peripheral to its official history, seen as essential yet treated as ephemeral. So we are left with the echoes of their laughter in the great halls and a cascade of unanswerable questions. What secret alliances did they forge in the servants' quarters? What personal tragedies were hidden behind a painted smile? The full, rich human scope of the jester's secret life remains, in so many ways, the final joke, one whose punchline is forever lost to time. Their secret lives reveal a stunning reality. The court jester was never just a clown, but a master of multiple, dangerous roles, all performed behind a painted smile. He was a political advisor whose fables could steer a king from war, a spy who gathered secrets under the guise of foolishness, and a social critic who held a mirror to the powerful. He was an artist and a psychologist, a trusted confidant and a therapeutic presence, all while maintaining the ultimate disguise. That foolishness was a brilliant strategic choice, a razor-sharp tool for survival and influence in a world where speaking plainly meant certain doom. This legacy challenges our simplest definitions of power and wisdom. It asks us to see the profound courage in making a tyrant laugh at his own reflection, and to recognize the enduring strength found in a well-timed, truthful joke. The jester's story is ultimately a testament to the subversive, timeless power of humor to speak truth to authority, a power that lives on today in every satirist, every comedian, and every brave voice that uses wit to challenge the status quo. Who are the modern jesters in our world that you admire? Share your thoughts and your favorite stories of these legendary fools in the comments below.